Morning all.
Good morning.
Morning all.
It's really nice to see you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us today to hear more about digitalising care recruitment. My name's Amanda Marquez. I'm one of the owners of Cohesion, and I'm really pleased to be here today acting as host for today's event. As ever, a few housekeeping points. Could you all please turn your mobile phones off and go on mute for the duration of the presentation? We will be taking questions at the end, so please post them as we move through the hour. But before we start, and by way of an introduction, Cohesion supports social care providers with recruitment and workforce solutions. Our clients span not-for-profit and for-profit of all sizes and in all care settings. We've always been fascinated by what makes a great hire and use data and evidence to deliver better recruitment results for our clients. And it was that really led us to the 6-year and counting collaboration with Professor Steve Woods and the development and launch of Care Character, which you will hear more about later. Professor Woods is a professor of organisational behaviour and HR management in the Work, Organisations and Management Group at the University of Liverpool Management School. He's a chartered registered occupational psychologist in the UK and works as a practitioner extensively with businesses globally, especially in the areas of HR assessment and development. Your speakers today also include Will Shepherd, who has over 25 years of recruitment experience, including 12 years as Cohesion's CEO, and Dave Beasley, Cohesion's talent director, an expert in driving best practice in social care recruitment. So, and now without any further ado, I'm going to pass you to Steve to hear more about today's topic, digitalisation in recruitment. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and thanks to all at Cohesion for organising this event this morning and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. Thanks also for the introduction, Amanda. That saves me running through it, and you can see on the slide here a little bit about my background, sort of where I am currently. And what I'd like to talk about in the session this morning is about digitalising care recruitment, and the way I'm going to do that is by sharing some background about digital assessment generally, what we know about digital assessment. This is a really emergent new field, and then reflecting on what we can learn about digital assessment, how we can apply it to the care sector, some issues that we may wish to think about as we apply it in the context in which we're working. So could I ask for you to move the slide on, please, Dave? Thanks. So here's the overview of what I'll talk about. I'll talk about the need for digitalisation in recruitment, why this is such an important topic. And then I'll outline 5 main forms of digital selection procedure. I'll share some information about what we know about them, and then how we could apply them and where caution is recommended. Part of the work that I do as an occupational psychologist is working with clients and organisations on recruitment and selection activities. And in the work that I do and the work that I've done over many years, I think one of the great challenges actually for practitioners in working in recruitment and selection practice is really to keep track of all of the kinds of digital developments that seem to come out at such a pace in the past few years. And so what I hope to do in the short time that I'll be presenting is give you a sense of what the landscape is like, what are these emergent techniques, how might they be applied, and what can we learn from them. Because this is something which really is going to continue. I see digital assessment as being is going to continue to be a really core part of what we do in recruitment practice. Therefore, keeping track of how these things fit together is really critical. So if I could ask you to move on, Dave. Yeah, okay, thanks. So let's start by thinking about some demands, some contemporary demands that really have given rise to the need for digital assessments. And I think, all of us, of course, have been working under this situation over the past year of COVID, and have really had to adapt and change the way that we work at an incredible pace. But in many ways, these changes have simply been, have simply hastened the development of recruitment and selection practice in the direction that it was already going. So a lot of the things that we've done to adapt, I think, would have happened in any case, but just the situation of COVID has obviously moved them on at a really significant pace. And I think this we can observe in some really critical demands. So I would say what I would identify as key demands, changes in the recruitment and selection practice generally, is to first of all look at the changing nature of the jobs market. And we've seen changes that have happened as a result of COVID, but also I say these are changes that I think were on the way anyway. And these include, for example, in some settings, we have a bigger applicant pool than we've had in the past. And this creates a lot of administrative difficulty for dealing with high numbers of applications in certain sectors. For other sectors, which I understand is how recruitment in care is developing, is that we have applicants from different backgrounds, that we have perhaps people coming into the industry from other industries or other sectors where they might not have seen care as a career for them initially, but now we see this greater diversification of applicants coming into the sector. And obviously in the past year we've had this need to undertake recruitment activity remotely, but I'd say there's also a desire to undertake significant amount of recruitment activity remotely because of the administrative convenience of it, and that it enables us to process things in a really efficient way. So I think this environment creates two trends in recruitment and selection practices. First, the need for assessment to be highly predictive and efficient, and I would add to that, efficient in the sense that it creates a administrative, straightforward process for us, but also creates a kind of positive and engaging experience for the applicants and for the candidates. So this is a really key demand. And then second, that it's conducted remotely. And so obviously digital assessments fill and address this need. Next slide, please, Dave. So digital selection procedures are these emergent techniques which really meet these demands. And I generally talk about 5 categories of digital assessment. So if we try to make sense of the landscape of digital assessment, I think we can identify 5 categories, and some of these are more established than others. So we define the selection procedures to begin with as any procedure that makes use of digital communication technology for the purpose of assisting us to make a recruitment and selection decision. The 5 categories are online applications, which have been around for many years now, and are standard applications presented online. Some of these increasingly, though, might be processed by AI. Psychometrics presented online and on mobile devices, and they're using multimedia in some settings. The third is digital interviews. So this can be done through digital video conference, or could be on-demand interviews where people pre-record interview responses, which are then rated either by us as recruiters or assessors or by AI. There are gamified assessments. These could be standalone games, or could be used to enhance other kinds of recruitment and selection techniques. And then, of course, we've got social media, which is ubiquitous now in terms of how we interact with one another, at work and out of work, and create as a result this digital footprint, which we can, which has the potential to be searched, or if we employ greater technology, scraped, which is essentially a way of saying that we apply an algorithm to identify information in the social media footprint. Now, each of these have obviously got their advantages and limitations, and I'm going to take a little bit of time to share some emergent evidence. So next slide, please, Dave. Thank you. All right, and we can move on. So I'm going to give a brief overview of each of these categories of technique and share what we know about them. And, you know, this really gives a prime, I think, for when we encounter them in our day-to-day practice. So online applications, I guess, are arguably the most well-established of these techniques. And with these, what we find is that applicants generally respond very positively to them because of the convenience of the way in which they're completed. And of course, again, from a management and administration point of view, having things collected in this way is beneficial for us. But there are some variations in how people perceive them. It depends on the things like the design, the content of them, the user friendliness of them, and customization. And I'm sure we've all got experiences of where we've seen online applications that are more or less usable. So with things like online applications, a key thing for us to think about is exactly how it comes across to the applicant, because perceptions that the applicant has early on in the process do influence how they move through the rest of the selection process. So important to keep this in mind. The second category is online psychometrics, and psychometric assessment moved online pretty quickly as internet technology developed, because obviously it presents an opportunity for delivering the assessment, but also for processing the metrics that produce scores on the assessment. So there's a widely used and applied, and actually in research, what's emerged, over the past 10 or more years, is that we've got good evidence of this measurement equivalence. In other words, that we know that the online psychometrics work as effectively as the as paper and pencil that were the original versions of psychometrics. And this should give us some confidence in the validity of them to tell us about people's potential. What I'd say with digital psychometrics is a couple of things to think about, though, because what it doesn't remove the need for is this careful examination of tests that, as practitioners, we're going to be presented with, with a lot of different information about assessments, and we need to examine it carefully. One of the great advantages of digital psychometrics is that they can be adapted to specific recruitment needs. And this means that we can take assessments and really fit them to the needs of specific recruitment contexts, even specific organizations in some cases. Care character is a good example of that, because with care character, what we did was develop the psychometric, the assessment, to really fit the needs of the care sector. So this was based on, quite extensive research and development around the 7 care qualities that we'll talk about later. And more than that, we actually reconfigured the assessment so that it directly tapped into those qualities. And this is where I mean about the, really making use of the advantages of the digital format, because adapting assessments in this way is more than just changing the cover of the product, and it's more than just rewriting some of the text in it. It's about reconfiguring the assessment to fit the needs of the context, and this is a real advantage of digital forms of assessment. If we can move on, please, Dave. Yeah, and then so then the next 2 categories, digital interviews and gamified assessments. So digital interviews, I'd probably separate 2 formats with these. That we have the video conferencing interviews that I'm sure we're all now very familiar with, given what we've been doing over the past 12 months. With those kinds of interviews, what's important is to just maintain good practice, because these are a different way of interacting, obviously, with the candidate, but we know a lot about what makes an effective face-to-face interview. This is going to be things like ensuring good interview structure, a good design of the questions, and also trying to preserve some of the features that work in a face-to-face interview, like having an environment that's conducive to us listening, and is conducive to us interacting well with the candidate, being aware of our body language and the way in which we respond to people. All of these things are important when we're doing video conference interviews or Zoom interviews, as opposed to face-to-face. But there's another class of digital interview, which are on-demand interviews, which are evaluated by either us as assessors or by AI. And it's this latter category which is increasingly common, the AI-based interview. And for here, with these, the evidence to date is really quite limited. It's unclear in many cases exactly what's being measured by the algorithms that, for example, will track facial movements or might interpret what people say. And we have limited validity evidence as to whether these really predict potential at the moment. So with these, we must really employ great care in the way that they're used if we do use them. And this brings us then on to gamified assessment. Some of you may have come across gamified assessments, which range from adding simple game elements to existing assessments, to the creation of virtual worlds or work environments. Gamified assessments might create this kind of virtual work environment in which people interact and people respond to work-based challenges. And the advantages that are put forward for these assessments is that they potentially reduce impression management, which we might see in an interview, for example. There's limited evidence of the validity, the way in which these actually predict potential, but there is some emergent evidence. There seems to be some research coming through now around gamified assessments. And the next slide, please, Dave. And then finally, social media. So this is a really important ongoing debate and discussion about the use of social media in recruitment and selection, because of course it raises these extensive ethical and privacy questions, which I'm sure all of us are considering in all of the work that we're doing in recruitment. Research which looks at the applicant side of recruitment suggests that actually the practice of searching social media in respect of selection is quite widespread, and interestingly, many people expect it. So applicants tend to expect that this will happen, and of course, this is why people are encouraged to take care over the way in which they curate their digital footprint. But this doesn't remove the issues around ethics and privacy. The practice of so-called digital scraping has been shown to predict individual differences in other contexts. It's not specifically in a recruitment and selection context, but for example, the way in which people present a social media profile, the kind of content they engage with, can give some indication of underlying traits and characteristics. But there's very limited application of this kind of practice in recruitment. What is more worrying is the use of informal human evaluation, which is effectively when someone searches social media. The evidence to date is that when this is done, we've got poor construct and criterion validity. Now, what that really means is that each person who searches social media attends to and looks at something different, and what they look at depends on them as much as the person that they're searching. And so what you tend to get is this bias in the way in which information is evaluated. What that leads to is a poor indication of how that person would actually perform, or their potential for hiring. So this is a big issue that we need to keep in mind with digitalisation of recruitment. Thanks, Dave. So now let's think about applying them. And I'm simply going to just present some implications and before I conclude. And these are really things to think about as we consider applying digital assessments in practice. So digital selection procedures fulfill this need for efficient and remote assessment. The way in which they're constructed can really make the experience of assessment also very positive. For example, with care character, we see that candidates really value the report that they get access to, because it helps them develop and helps them plan the way that they will approach their work and approach their career in the care sector. So they have the potential to have a great benefit in this sense. But what we must be really mindful of is the potential limitations, particularly when we talk about these new digital techniques. The speed at which they've been developed and which they are taken up in the market often is not consistent with the level of evidence that we've got for their effectiveness, particularly where there's a use of algorithms. There's a lack of transparency. We sometimes don't know exactly how algorithms will form their assessment and what information is being attended to. And what this means is that particularly with these AI-driven techniques, there's a great potential for bias. And in particular here, if I look around digital interviewing that's evaluated by AI, gamified assessment, and aspects around social media, there is a very high probability, a high chance that bias will be incurred as a result, particularly because we're not always, as I say, sure how the algorithm or the AI is actually working. And there remain concerns about privacy of data. Once we assess people digitally, of course, there's a digital store of that information. And so people are rightly concerned about how secure that data is, what happens to it, where it's stored and how it's dealt with. So there remain concerns about this. The final implication, I would say, around digital assessment is to really think about these in the way that they integrate into our wider approach to recruitment and selection. There's sometimes a temptation, I think, to think about digital development and the digital economy as providing replacements for conventional or traditional approaches that we might have used in the past. And that's really not the best way to think about digital forms of recruitment and selection or digital assessments. They really need to be seen as tools that we can integrate into our practice, that should on their own merits provide some benefits, provide additional benefit that we don't get from the ways that we typically recruit and select. So the important thing here is to see them as not replacements, but as ways to improve practice. What can we do to improve the practice by integrating these digital techniques? And the final slide, please, Dave. So conclusions briefly. So digital selection procedures really are a new frontier in recruitment practice, in work psychology, and in HR management. And they really call on us to they present a challenge for us to really ensure that they are applied in the right way, because it's obviously us that are at the sharp end of putting these techniques into practice. And sometimes I'd say that in some cases they are adopted in practice without this established evidence of their effectiveness and understanding the impact on applicants' experience. And that's why actually, as I say, with care character, for example, we've done quite a lot to look at these issues, which I know Will's going to share shortly. For practitioners, what I think the coming years will see is further transformation. This isn't going to slow up. This isn't going to, to move backwards in any way. And I think what this will bring is the challenge of keeping our critical conventional approaches, what we've been doing really well and what we know works, whilst leveraging the real benefits of this digitalisation. So at that point, I'll finish and hand back to Amanda. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Wow, that was really interesting, and it really underlines just what remarkable and extraordinary times we're living in for all the reasons that you mentioned. And we've got some really interesting questions, but we're going to come back to those later. And first, a little bit of reflection and a handover to our next segment. It's a really proud moment for us at Cohesion to remember that it was February 2015, my goodness, when we hosted an event at Aston Business School along with one or two attendees that I've noticed on the list have signed up and are here today. And that was to launch the PhD that Cohesion sponsored, which was specifically focused at looking at what makes the best frontline workers in the UK. And that PhD, undertaken by Dr. John Barrett and overseen by you, Steve, that really informed the development and the building of care character, our values-based digital assessment, which you're now going to hear a lot more about from Will and Dave. So Will and Dave, over to you. Will, you're up first.
Thank you, Amanda. And also to Steve, some really interesting insights for the care sector, both for now and for the future. As Amanda says, I'm Will Shepherd. I'm the CEO of Cohesion. And with my colleague Dave, we're going to take over the presentation for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. We're going to look at a specific digital recruitment tool. It's been referred to a couple of times. It's one that both Steve and Cohesion are closely connected to, and that's Care Character. So what is Care Character? Well, it's a tool designed to add benefit throughout the recruitment process. It's a candidate engagement tool. We found that applicants who are processed via Care Character are many more times more likely to show up for interview than those who aren't. And additionally, they come prepared and engaged with your organisation. It's a care worker assessment, a purpose-built psychometric tool that uses, as Amanda said, PhD research to identify high-performing workers in the care sector. It's a hiring manager interview tool, as well as saving time with candidate no-shows through their enhanced engagement and commitment. Care Character also supports values-based recruitment and builds consistency, as well as saving time with a unique tailored interview framework. It includes an introduction to the successful. It includes an introduction of the successful recruit to your client end user, a report that introduces them or their families to the person that you have hired to work with them. Care Character is a digital recruitment tool which enhances recruitment results for care organisations, a more efficient recruitment process which leads to better care workers who stay with you for longer. And we want to give you some more detail on this digital recruitment tool, which, while only 9 months old, is already in use with a number of organisations across the UK care sector and helping to recruit hundreds of new care workers already. So let me give you some more details about Care Character. It's a psychometric assessment, as I say, designed specifically for the care sector. It was created by Professor Steve Woods, leading psychologist, professor, and of course, our lead presenter today, and myself, drawing on my experience as CEO of Cohesion, care and healthcare recruitment specialists. Care Character uses findings from the research of Dr. John Barrett, the PhD published and called Recruitment and Selection in the UK Care Sector. And we also use John's input to ensure that the behaviours he identified for a good care worker are the ones predicted by the assessment. Care Character is built on and sits on the fully validated Trait Online psychometric assessment platform from Aston Business Assessments, led by Steve, which is widely used across many different types of organisations and tests. We then input Cohesion expertise of care candidates and multiple social care recruitment processes with multiple providers, particularly in terms of language, presentation, and process. What came out was the 7 care qualities, which I will show you in a couple of slides' time. We designed Care Character to support values-based recruitment, which is all about selecting people on being the right fit rather than because of their experience, or in some cases, lack of experience in the care sector. Our evidence, having recruited in care for over 10 years, proves that by recruiting following a values-based approach, you will keep your recruitment costs down by not having to re-recruit as regularly and ensure you're finding the right skills and behaviours for your teams. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the PhD and the research that underlies Care Character. The PhD sought to establish criteria for effective performance of care workers, along with the drivers of retention and attrition, in order to develop a strategy at the front end of recruitment and selection of those effective care workers. To achieve this, John conducted 3 research studies, including interviews with present and past care workers, organisations, and their managers, to develop and validate a performance measure to assess care worker performance, an insight into why care workers might otherwise leave an organisation, and how the recruitment process might adjust for this, and a longitudinal study of care worker effectiveness. The main study included over 350 performance assessments across 18 care providers. Now, it's a weighty tome, the copy of the PhD that John gave me sits on my desk. But there are some interesting other conclusions contained within it beyond the scope of care character, and our much shorter executive summary gives some overview of that. If anybody would like, please ask. So from all of the research in John's PhD, we honed in on the behavioural elements, and after a mapping process to the competencies within the technology that care character sits on, we came up with the following 7 qualities of care. So communication, the extent to which a person communicates effectively with others. Good verbal and non-verbal skills are essential, both for the person or person supported as well as the wider care team. Compassion and empathy, the extent to which a person seeks to build meaningful and trustful relationships with others, considered an essential element, of course, in care worker performance. Dutifulness, the extent to which a person organises and plans their time effectively. Team working, the extent to which a person seeks to work collaboratively with others to achieve a common goal. Inclusivity and respect, the extent to which a person values and respects the diversity of people and seeks to understand them. Adaptable and resilient, the extent to which a person adapts and perseveres through stressful situations. And procedural compliance, the extent to which a person is committed to working according to rules and regulations. And those 7 care qualities sit on top of a number of traits and competencies which are built into the system underneath. And again, more information about that is available to people who want to drill down a bit further. I'm going to ask Dave to pick up now and explain how we turn this research, these 7 care qualities, into a digital recruitment tool that's delivering great results for the organisations using it.
Thank you, Will, and good morning, everyone. So we truly believe that the arrival of care character is really timely, given the challenges we all face with recruitment and retention in the care sector, but also the changing nature of the market that we've all seen over the last 12 months. We run an ongoing survey of applicants to care, and the recent figures tell us that since March last year, we've received an increase of 18% of applicants from those out of sector or new to care. And that doesn't include all those that haven't opted in to complete the survey. So we're definitely seeing more people wanting to join the sector, which is great to see. Now I think we all agree it's really fantastic to see that, but we also know that keeping those candidates engaged through the recruitment process, right through to that start, really isn't easy at times. And if you're a candidate that's not used to the compliance hurdles that we need you to jump through, it's even trickier. So time and resource following up with all applicants in order to fill our vacancies is significant for all of us. Of course, engaging with applicants from the earliest possible moment is key, and differentiating your organisation from others, both in and out of sector, is essential. And I guess this is the first use of care character. It's been designed to appeal to applicants who are genuinely interested in working in care, but perhaps they might not know if it's right for them. And for those that know me, my answer to that will very much be, of course it will be. If you've got the right values, we'll train you, we'll support you, and we'll show you why it's the sector to come and join. Now, care character guides candidates through the 7 care qualities that we've shown you this morning. It helps them to understand where their own behaviours match these qualities, and it gives them a report which can help them with their interview and help them to further develop their own career as well. But let's start at the beginning. So the 7 care qualities can all be featured during your attraction and engagement content that you're using. So we recommend you do just that. Appeal to the applicants through the 7 qualities that will make them a great fit to work for you. So what do we mean by that? So it could be career site content that appeals to each of those qualities within your organisation. There could be a video on your career site about what compassion and empathy means, or perhaps one of your existing carers talking about the importance of being adaptable and resilient. Embedding these qualities into your content will draw more of the appropriate applicants that we all see. And in our survey to candidates who have completed the care character assessment, 73% of them indicate an intention to use the report in the future, which is really great to see. Understanding the care qualities is really important to high quality applicants. And candidates who take the care character assessment when invited to do so before their interview are 3 times more likely to show up for an interview than those who don't complete the assessment. 93% have told us that it's easy to complete. And as we've touched on this morning, this was really important in the design for us. We want it to engage applicants. We don't want it to put them off. I certainly don't want any more barriers in a recruitment process. And we've really thought about that when we've designed care character. So you can maximize the impact by communicating the 7 qualities and explaining why you are using the assessment throughout your recruitment process. You're encouraging applicants to explore the qualities, complete the assessment, understand the value of doing so and the results that they'll receive, and use it to prepare for the interview itself. Okay, so let's take a look at what the candidate does to complete the care character assessment. So there are 74 statements across 10 pages. This is all online. On average, it will only take a candidate 7 minutes to complete, and that could be on a computer, a laptop, tablet, or phone, so it's making it really accessible. And the length of the assessment, so being only 7 minutes on average, was key to the design because we want it to be quick and easy for candidates to complete. And as I mentioned, we don't want to put them off, and we certainly don't want them to not attend their interview. And with that, we tend to not make the assessment a mandatory feature of the recruitment process. This is a discovery exercise for candidates, and we're inviting them to take part. Now, all dimensions are scored on a 1 to 10 range, and the outcome of the assessment measured against the 7 care qualities that we've shown you. So an example to one of the statements that you can see on screen would be, in general, I see myself as someone who starts conversations with others. And as the candidate, I would select from one of the options, whether that be strongly disagree, disagree a little, neutral, agree a little, or strongly agree. And again, to keep it simple, the answer options presented remain the same across the assessment. Now, the platform is validated as both a structured assessment for construct validity. So this demonstrates that it's measuring what it claims to measure, and also predictions of job performance based on the assessment, which is known as criterion validity. Now, for anyone who is more interested in the validity of care character, we've got plenty more detail that we can share with you. And I'm not looking at the chat at the moment, but if there are any questions on this, I'm definitely going to be inviting Steve to help us answer some of those. So upon completion of the assessment, the candidate will receive their own report from the care character tool. The candidate report is 4 pages long, with 1 page giving really clear instructions for the candidate on how they can use the report. It then shows the 7 qualities, provides a definition and individual score based on their assessment for each quality, and considerations to help them prepare for their interview with you. And if we take a look at the slide, we've given you one example of one of the qualities in the report from the candidate's perspective of compassion and empathy. So we can see that we've given the candidate the score. Here they've scored 7. It gives them a description of what we mean by compassion and empathy, and then some recommendations that can be used as their care career is developed. So this is practical advice and guidance for the candidate in question to use. What we find really exciting about care character as a digital tool is that it impacts so many areas that are important in recruitment. And even before we look at the assessment from a hiring point of view, or the structure that it brings to an interview process, we can see the major impact that it has on engagement for applicants, setting those employers using it apart from others. So on the screen, we've just shared some of the feedback that we're already receiving from candidates. So now let's move on to how care character can transform the interview process and interview outcomes. So at headline level, care character does 2 things. 1, it provides individual feedback from the assessment completed by each applicant. And when used in volume, the tool helps to build and formalize a structure around interview standards. And for individual applicants, the tool will provide hiring managers with both feedback on each applicant's assessment, and it will additionally provide a set of values-based interview questions that a hiring manager can use to probe applicants further during the interview. So now let's look at the hiring manager report. So here we are looking at what the interviewer receives as part of the report, and we've used the same example that we use for the candidates scoring. Every applicant is given a score against each of the 7 qualities, which we can see on the screen, and an overall potential score. Now, our data is confirming that as a general rule, a score of 7 or above represents high potential in applicants. We would, I guess, expect this to vary slightly for different organisations, and we definitely say you have the ability to set your own benchmarks. And while Care Character is currently used by organisations ahead of interview stage, the validity of the overall potential score would allow use of the assessment earlier in the process if you choose to use it there. So you could use it as a screening out tool for applicants if required. Perhaps providers with high volume recruitment are more likely to take this route. However, for now, let's continue to look at the Care Character from an interview perspective. So if we delve into, again, compassion and empathy, this time for the hiring manager. So first of all, it's good to mention that the report itself for hiring managers is longer, so it's 9 pages. We give an overall summary, so it's easy for managers to use, but also if the manager wants to delve much deeper into each of the traits, it gives much more detail behind the profile against each of the 7 qualities. So looking at compassion and empathy again, there's a score at the top. So we can see the candidate has again scored 7, and it tells you about the candidate profile so that we can see the candidate in this instance will be inclined to empathise, they'll be quick to read emotions, but it's also identified that this person might be less sympathetic at times, perhaps when they're under pressure. So it's something that you can then probe further at interview. And this is where the structured interview element of Care Character really comes to light. So in the bottom half of the screen here, you can see some recommended interview questions. And these are the questions that get tailored to each candidate, dependent on how they have scored. And it allows the interviewer to tap into specific qualities a little bit further. So in effect, they're sense checking that they meet the quality that's being examined, and they can do some probing further if required. Now, for one provider, applicants who completed a Care Character report and scored in the recommended range, they were offered an overall rate of 50% more than those without a Care Character report or had scored a low or an average score. Now, what I would say here is that, of course, beyond Care Character, there are reasons why someone might not be suitable for an offer from interview, even where they score high potential. They might not meet the needs of the shift patterns. They might not be able to get to the service or the home. So there's elements that sit beyond values. But remember that Care Character is one part of the selection process, and it gives you the ability to consider the potential, probe further, and make hiring decisions with more confidence. So what I would say here is take a look at the massive difference that a score of 7 and above makes compared to those who either didn't complete the assessment when asked or scored 6 or less. Care Character is in this instance a digital judge of both engagement and care qualities. Cohesion are assisting a number of clients with rolling out Care Character at present, and the feedback that we've received from clients has been positive, particularly surrounding the scoring of qualities correlating with the candidate's performance at interview and the suggested interview questions supporting the direction of travel and supporting that interview process. We know there's a varying competence within organisations in terms of hiring manager abilities. So this tool is really helpful in making sure it's providing questions that can be used at interview and used well. And we tend to see psychometrics sitting at higher level recruitment or in graduate recruitment traditionally. And where there are other tools, what I would say is Care Character provides something to help the candidate to navigate through the process and do their best. This is rather than it being a tool to deselect people. Something we perhaps see in other sectors which in my view isn't great practice. And as well as receiving positive provider feedback, we work closely with the National Care Forum. We're supporters and key annual partners, and we work with many of their members to support recruitment. And Care Character is being deployed in many of those processes. So we asked Vic Rayner to give the assessment a go, and she kindly took us up on that offer. And you'll see on screen what she told us. Now, NCF are a great voice for the not-for-profit and social enterprise providers. If you fit this category and you don't know about all the great work they do, you should definitely get in touch. And I understand they're also offering a 3-month free membership at the moment, so all the more reason to do so. Okay, so based on working with a number of organisations to implement and get the best out of Care Character over the last 6 months, we've come up with a number of recommendations. We do a lot of this when we're training hiring managers on the use of Care Character, but I wanted to share some of these with you today. These apply directly to Care Character, but I think that you'll find that most of them would fit any type of digital recruitment solution that you're looking at or considering. And if there's one thing we've learned quite quickly from adapting processes during a pandemic, candidates will and have embraced digitalisation, so we shouldn't be scared to utilise it in care. So firstly, engage with hiring managers, train them on how to make use of these tools as appropriate. It's really important that the interviewers know why you've chosen to use Care Character as an organisation and how they can get the most out of the tool. Allow Care Character to guide you or the hiring manager beyond an applicant's ability to interview. Interviewers should take time to read the report before the interview, select some of the questions that have been tailored for the particular candidate, and they could even consider whether any particular qualities are more important to their particular setting. And they can very much sit alongside the usual interview questions you use, so managers can think about which ones they can feed in alongside similar themes that they already use at interview. We always recommend with any interview tool that you're creating positive and negative indicators. So you're deciding what a good answer and a not so good answer looks like against a question. And this gives the interviewer something measurable to go back to, preventing some of that bias that Steve touched on earlier. And they can absolutely, those indicators, be tailored to the organisation, to the setting, and they can be meaningful for hiring managers so that they can listen out for those prompts during an interview. It's always great to ask the candidate how they found the assessment. Do they agree? And whatever the answer is, it's a really useful discussion topic to be having with the candidate at interview. And finally, I'd say don't stop at the recruitment process when using Care Character. The reports can definitely be used for a new starters training and development plan. Managers can discuss with them on how they're going to support them improving their potential against some of those care qualities. It can feed into one-to-ones. It perhaps can feed into some stay interview questions that you should be using. So there's some really useful uses of Care Character beyond recruitment. So I want to hand back to Will now, who will finish with some final thoughts from us before we refer back to the chat and hopefully answer some of the questions that have come through. So Will, back to you.
Thanks, Dave. So I just want to finish off with a few final elements of Care Character that are, again, typical of it as a digital tool. I mentioned earlier a third report to present a successful applicant to the persons cared for or their families. So pre-digital, this might have been a harder task, but having initially discussed the usefulness of this report with a number of providers just at the beginning of the year, we're in a position to be releasing the report in the next week or two. The overview of a carer's skills and how they might play out are all based on the same questionnaire and the responses conducted in a single assessment, but the digital process allows for a quick adaptation of a product and its outcomes. And there's more that can be done to build on an applicant's behaviour profile generated by the assessment. We're hearing more and more interest, and Dave's touched on this. We use post-interview and in one-to-ones and appraisals. And of course, the 7 care qualities apply once an applicant started work with you as an employee too. The assessment in its current form can be used with existing staff as a basis for developmental conversations with managers, but we will in the future create a further unique report with an L&D slant specifically for the task. And I might just take one of the questions off the list now. Cheryl asked about whether this report works for all levels in care. The report is designed specifically for care workers, but again, with the correct level of research that Steve alluded to earlier, we will work on mapping a report ultimately for managers within care organisations as well. And finally, another benefit of going digital with your recruitment assessments is data. There's a massive capacity for Care Character to enable you as an employer to report on the likes of different hiring patterns across your organisation, different locations or different hiring managers. Which of the 7 care qualities resonate strongest with those of you that you hire? And somebody I know has posted a question about different scores within different within the different qualities. Feedback from applicants on how the assessment of the 7 care qualities were applied and communicated throughout the process, that kind of engagement piece. And with the right software, somebody's asked a question about this or made a point about this, with the right software connections to your HR tools, we can report on Care Character profile of your best employees as well, which would be fantastic. So last slide. Finally, can I give you an insight into Care Character in action as experienced by those organisations who have used or are using Care Character currently as part of their recruitment process? So Cohesion, often Dave, provides implementation and training support for all organisations. This includes how, process-wise, you can ensure best practice and training for hiring managers on how to get the best from Care Character and its reports. All 3 reports are included for organisations who use Care Character. That's the hiring manager report, the candidate report, and the person cared for or service user report. We provide access to our analysis, both of your own data, but also trends that we see across the industry through the use of Care Character. And we offer results-based pricing. So you either have a license for unlimited use of the tests across the organisation, or you take advantage of our on-offer pricing. But either way, you won't pay for every individual test you use, but only on successful hire of an individual. And finally, we're seeing the powerful impact of Care Character in action, and we strongly recommend that it's considered by all care organisations. You can talk to Steve, myself, or any of the Cohesion team for more details and information. But you can also sign up for a Care Character trial for your organisation. We're suggesting that organisations use Care Character for the next 2 vacancies and to see the impact of the recruitment process themselves. We'd like to invite all of you here today to take advantage of this offer. And that's it. That's it from Dave and I. But Steve is still online. I know a lot of you got questions for Steve and his expertise. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass over to Amanda, who's going to manage the question part of the session.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you, everyone, for your attention through the session. So we've had quite a few questions. I'm going to run through these and try and direct them to the most appropriate person. Jacqueline, hi Jacqueline, really pleased you could join us today. Jacqueline had a question about how online applications improve diversity and inclusion. Steve, can we have your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if I speak perhaps speak specifically about online applications, rather than other techniques, but in respect of online applications, I would say that there's a number of opportunities there to to help with diversity and inclusion. I tend to separate the two issues actually. When we think about, we often talk about diversity and inclusion, but I think we can separate the two. And I think improving diversity is obviously, is obviously why with good online applications we can do things like removing identifiable information and any information about, for example, protected characteristics are not presented in the part of the application that's actually evaluated. So all of these can, all of these modifications and changes to online applications can really help in the way that we evaluate them. They can remove any potential for bias to be incurred, and therefore improve diversity. So I'd say there's quite a bit of scope for online applications. In terms of inclusion, I think probably just broaden out a little bit, and and think about online applications, but other techniques. I think any way in which the technique allows people to engage more with the recruitment process, I would see as being as contributing to inclusivity. Inclusivity, I see is about the experience of the candidate and bringing them into the process. So anything that we can do to improve that engagement, I would see as improving inclusivity.
Perhaps something like changing the language that you're using, or really looking at the types of words, and thinking about the audience. That's a really good point, actually.
And asking for feedback from candidates.
Fantastic.
Having candidates being able to tell you about their experiences is really key.
Okay, Will touched on some of the issues around integrating with internal systems, but Jacqueline also asked specifically about how we felt Care Character could support equality, diversity, and inclusion. So could we also have your thoughts on that, please, Steve? And then I'm going to go to Dave and Will for the next question, I promise.
Yeah. So I think Care Character in particular with let's keep with that theme of inclusivity, because the applicant involvement and engagement is part of the way it's designed. And I think that in having this output, this report that we've got for candidates, it brings them into the process, engages them in the process, and the report, what they tell us is that they feel very positive about that. So I think in terms of bringing them and involving candidates in the recruitment, I think this is a real benefit of Care Character in terms of making recruitment inclusive. I think on the diversity and equality side, I think also what we try to do with Care Character is really broaden the scope of what we're looking at in the evaluation of candidates. So we've got the 7 qualities, we've got structured interview questions that are suggested, and all of this really is designed to improve, broaden the scope of what we're looking at, improve the structure in selection processes. And so in that respect, I think does improve fairness and ultimately equality and diversity.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so Elaine, I think Elaine, you are our most prolific questioner, which is brilliant, and something that we want to encourage in our forums. So I'm going to run through some of your questions now. Dave, do you think psychometrics put people off? Do they lengthen the process too long? What can you tell us about some of the insight from the cold face and what we're seeing where clients are using the assessments?
Yeah, sure. Great question, Elaine, and something we regularly get asked when implementing Care Character. And as I say, a key feature in the design of Care Character, we know at Cohesion we recruit thousands of frontline care and support workers year on year for our clients. And if someone had said to me, we're going to put another process, we're going to put something else in the process and something else in the process, normally I'd sort of be against that. But Care Character genuinely supports the process in the right way. I mentioned earlier, we tend to not make the assessment mandatory to candidates, but what we do is we encourage them to see the benefit of taking part or opting in to complete the assessment. So it's probably how you use it will affect whether that then puts people off or not. The 7-minute on average feature is obviously another key function, and something when we're speaking to candidates and encouraging them to take part in Care Character, we will say to them, it will only take you 7 minutes. There's a real benefit for you doing this. It's going to help you for your interview. It's going to give you guidance. You can use it for beyond our recruitment process. So there could be an argument to say, is there a concern? Yes, it's adding another tool to the process, but I certainly wouldn't say that it's something that's putting people off or adding a lot of time. And actually the benefit of using it for both the candidate and the hiring manager far outweigh not using care character, I would say. So hopefully that answers your question, Elaine.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Elaine. Thanks, Elaine. Fantastic. Okay, so Cheryl asked who the test was for, and we'll cover that quite nicely. So it's for care and support workers. We are looking to develop an assessment specifically for care managers. But what's our view? So Catherine Woodrow, Catherine, you asked how often do we update and review the questions? We haven't been live for that long, so I think this one is out to all three of you. Are there any plans to update and review the questions, guys?
Who's going to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I don't mind starting with
Okay.
that. Yeah. So I think with a standardized assessment, we've got two aspects that I would that I think are relevant for questions. So you've got the input questions, which are the questions that the candidate or respondent fills out when they complete the assessment, and these are standardized evaluated items that have been through pretty rigorous testing and research. So what's important for those items is that they, if they are updated, that it's alongside quite an extensive redevelopment of the tool. I mean, actually, the items and the way they've been written is very straightforward. We took a long time in the development of them, and that they've been working really quite effectively in this context and elsewhere. So those will be updated periodically, but not really that often. The interview questions that we present for the users of the assessment, those we're taking feedback on from users of the assessment, all of the time, actually, through the way in which we talk with clients, and perhaps Dave and Will can say a little bit more about that. But those we of course will update, can update as we get more and more user feedback.
Thank you on that one. So that, Elaine, that also covers your other question set, or can they be adapted? And I think that therein lies the difference, whether it's the hardwired questions from the assessment or the output questions. Will, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, to echo what you're saying there, and I think that the third report that we've discussed is the best example, that we didn't change any of the questions. The assessment, as Steve says, is fixed because of the validity that it's shown in so many circumstances. We take in feedback, and Steve's mentioned hiring managers. We take feedback from all applicants who do it. So it's very straightforward for us to tweak either the interview questions, as Steve mentioned, or the report to candidates, which gives advice on things they might consider, but also just the presentation overall of how it looks and how engaging it is, particularly for candidates.
Excellent, thank you. So really juicy question here. This is one of the juiciest, I think, from my perspective anyway. Rianne mentioned that they're using care character within the organisation, and candidates were scoring low, specifically on inclusivity and respect. How can they improve that? And what should they be considering? What should they be doing, both to improve it with new people coming into the organisation and also with their current staff?
And I know you said you'd give Steve a break, but you're right, that is a juicy question. And of course, the answer to that would lie in much greater analysis. But I think Steve can shed some light on.
Thank you.
Yeah. So,
again.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is I think a really good question, actually, and so I think when I think about the way that people develop day to day in their work, I think we can think about a kind of developmental cycle, and that cycle begins with self-awareness and self-insight. So I think the benefit of something like care character is to provide that self-insight. If we've conducted an assessment like care character, we can give some feedback. We've got a means to discuss issues with individual members of staff, or even to get a sense of what is the benchmark, or what's the average across our team or organization. So we've got some first of all, some mechanism for developing that self-awareness, but we've also got a structured diagnostic that's actually highlighted this issue. So there's real value in that. And then it's about addressing the associated behaviours, and for that we can look at the quality definitions that we've put together, because it can give us a clue, it can give us some direction towards how we might encourage people to change their behaviour, to be aware of perhaps what they're doing that maybe not exactly what we want them to do, or what's desirable in the context of their day-to-day work activity, and we can encourage them to change that behaviour with something like inclusivity and respect. It's about the way they communicate, the way they listen, how they how they try to appreciate the needs of others, regardless of their background. So I hope, as I say, I think if you look at those aspects, the sort of beginning the conversation by providing self-insight, giving us the information to start with, and then helping us to identify behaviours that people can change. This is how we could address it, I think.
Thank you, Steve. Will, we've had a couple of questions specifically around pricing. Would you like to pick up on that and talk us through the per hire model?
Yeah, I mean, only in as much as giving you a vague outline, because there are organisations using Care Character who have thousands of employees and hundreds of recruits, and others who have just a few. So of course the price does depend very much on the volume. But the idea of I think the question came in terms of the per successful hire is largely for smaller organisations who definitely don't use a license for everything. And what we realised was that sort of rolling a dice and hoping that you had only 2 applicants who were perfect and only paying for 2 tests, or suddenly finding you had 8 and paying 4 times as much wasn't perfect, and not what we wanted to achieve for organisations either. So so we fixed a cost per hire. And I mean, the only thing I can tell you is that if you just come to us and you want to recruit one person, well, if you come to us and you want to recruit one person, take advantage of our offer at the moment and do that one and one more for free. But on an ongoing basis, if you were just recruiting one person, you're going to pay £125 per hire, which given the overall cost of hiring an individual and the extent of the impact Care Character can have on in the entire process, is we think very good value for money. But that price can drop dramatically based on volume, and I don't think it's straightforward for me to say more than that, because I have to say I don't know the size of the organisations of the people who've asked the questions, but I'd love to talk to you about it a bit more.
Thanks, Will. Okay, a couple more questions just to circle back to a few that I may well have missed. Elaine also asked in what settings the assessments being used across all frontline care settings, and equally John worked with a variety of providers, both dom care, elderly care, learning disabilities in his PhD. And then for what I think is our last question, which is a real tough one, and I'm gonna just put it out there to all 3 of you. I suspect Dave and Will, you'll have a view on this. Jane Perez asks, how successful have we been in rural areas? That's a really tough one, given where we are at the moment.
Do you want me to? I'll perhaps.
Yes, please.
I'll start, and then well, again, it is a relatively new tool, but certainly what we want to be doing is, as we're working with providers, is getting that feedback as to where the tool is having an impact. And actually, it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to look at what impact it has in those more harder to fill areas. I guess the reality is it's harder to fill in many areas right across the country for many providers, for various different reasons. Whether you look at Care Character as I'm going to focus on the engagement elements here. What you are doing, if you're utilising it in those harder to fill areas, you're potentially differentiating yourself to other care providers and other non-care settings that are also recruiting and competing for candidates in those more rural areas. So it's something that if you talk about using Care Character and a tool that will give the candidates something back as part of the recruitment process, I would suggest that's a really, a potentially good reason why someone might opt in to apply for you. But data at this stage on where it's having success in rural areas, I'd love to see if we start to build up on that. But I certainly think it can be a differential tool.
Thank you, Dave. I totally agree. And I guess, certainly what we've seen in the last year is people that have been considering care from other industries. Who are we all competing with? We're competing with the supermarkets. Are they investing and giving people a report all about themselves and, how they can do well at interview? Not as far as I know. In fact, I'm pretty comfortable saying they're probably not investing in their new entry-level frontline staff. So I think that's a very good point, Dave. Right, that brings me to the end of questions, but we'll just pause there to give you all an opportunity to come off mute if I've missed anything that you'd like to raise. I'm conscious we've gone a little bit over. So is there
Amanda, I spotted a question. Somebody asked about ATS integration. And that's one of my favorite topics,
yeah.
and so I guess that's important because this whole theme's also obviously been about digitalising recruitment, and I know a lot of the care sector are moving towards, or a lot of the care sector who didn't have an ATS a year ago have picked one up in the meantime, or in the process of buying one. So yes, this integrates into ATS systems. We send the link out via an ATS. Of course, you can, depending on your ATS, you can set specific codes or progress statuses up for applicants. So you can then code the fact that they've been sent a link. You can report on that, and potentially by using postcodes, you can get some answers on rural areas as well. What we have at the moment is Care Character generates a PDF. For the reports, and they are not particularly straightforward to integrate via API connections. So they can, of course, be loaded into most ATS as documents, and we put in processes in place to do that. But the full integration will come in a couple of months, where the actual numerical scores and the content in the reports will be passed as data files straight into an ATS. But of course, that very much depends on which ATS you selected. For anybody who's still in that process or hasn't gone down that route yet, we are working with a software provider to try and help them develop the ideal ATS for the care sector, and that will have an integration with Care Character and should be available early summer. But the answer to that one is yes. But as with any technology, it kind of depends on both sides of the fence.
Okay, thank you, Bill. A couple of other quick questions have come in. So Lucy from MHA has asked, is there any data on retention of candidates from this method? I think the answer to that question is not yet, but we're assessing it closely with our clients and on behalf of our clients. And Cheryl Jones has asked, and Cheryl, it's not a daft question. No, it's not. Is the tool accessible to candidates on mobile devices? So we've sent the link to somebody. Can they fill out the assessment on their phone?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, great. So I think now we've covered all the questions, and appreciate you all hanging on to hear the answers. As Will mentioned, we'll be sharing the follow-up from the session. Please get in touch with any of us on the Cohesion team if you'd like to take us up on the offer or discuss anything in more detail. And look out for the recording, which we will also be sharing with you. But thanks once again for your time today, and thank you to all of our speakers. Steve, that was fantastic. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Dave. That was awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.